So these would be my tips after growing citrus for 2 years now. This is a Meyer Lemon, and how I would choose this one I bought only a month ago. And I was walking through my local nursery here, and they had one sitting there. It looked really dry. The leaves were really small, tiny little bush, really dried out. Did not look all that good, but it had some things that I think make it much more successful, your better chance of growing a citrus and having it live and having it prosper. One of the benefits of this tree, and I'll show you now, is the trunk size. You can see here how large a trunk it has. Even though it was a very small bush, it had quite a diameter in the trunk. So that means it's an older tree, older plant that had been pruned heavily, which means that's why it was so small. It would have been a bigger, bushier plant, more like this one here. Probably not quite that big, but quite large. And then they pruned it really heavily, and then it put on new growth. But all the leaves are very small, and basically that just means they didn't fertilize it adequately. And it was also bone dry, very dry. They hadn't watered it much. And when I put the container, just came. It was a very small container that it was in, the pot. And when I pulled it off, you could see the roots just extremely root bound, which you would think is a bad thing, but in citrus it's actually a great thing. A root bound plant turns out to be much easier to keep and survive. You never have to worry about the soil being too soggy, that kind of thing, because it's got so much roots that it'll just suck up the water so quickly that you don't quite have to worry so much about the mix and the soil you're using. Sorry about that. So it means it's a bigger plant, just a small one, and so they were selling it for $19 because it was so small. So I grabbed it, put it in a slightly bigger pot. Don't put it too much bigger, and that way it'll get root bound again fairly quickly. And that's really what you want. You want to go from root bound to root bound to root bound, just slowly getting a bigger pot each time. Especially, that it's not as big a deal in the summer, but in the winter, when you bring it inside, if you're in a northern climate, having the root bound pot is just so much better chance of surviving. So this one, I brought it home about 25 days after bringing it home and feeding it some liquid fertilizer, which I'll show you what I use now. See, this is the brand I use. It's actually for orchids. I feed that once every 2 weeks about, and water it regularly, and it just sat there in full sun, did nothing for about 25 days. And then all of a sudden it's put on a massive amount of new growth. I'll show you some of the new growth here in close-up. It's growth there, here, up here. This is all new. And the leaves, you can see these are the first leaves that came out, are twice, maybe 4 times as big as the leaves the plant had. So that means with the extra fertilizer I've been giving it, it started to really put on leaves the proper size. A citrus should have a fairly good sized leaf. Is my understanding. And it's put on some flowers already. I've got flowers in multiple spots, which is a really good sign. We're going to have fruit here. And because it's such a small plant and so compact, but with a large branch structure, it's less likely to pull the lemons down so far and make them hanging down, because it's got much shorter but stronger branches. So it should be a very attractive one. A sign that you're not doing well, especially in the winter, is if a citrus puts on a huge amount of flowers but no new growth. So if it's just flowering everywhere. I had one do this a year and a half ago. Peppers it with flowers. That citrus is dying. It will die. I have not figured out a way to save it. I tried repotting it. It didn't work. But when it's putting on new growth like this and a few flowers here and there, that's a very good sign. I hand pollinate them just by coming over and kind of touching them. The pollen gets on my finger, and then I just rub it on the little nodule there, and you will have lemons. You can see one on my other plant right there. That's would have been a flower, 3 months ago probably, or 2 months ago. And it's also putting on new growth, which is good. So that concludes what I would do when I'm trying to find a really good citrus to buy. Look for a small plant with a large trunk diameter, or at least put the trunk diameter shows how old the plant is. So go for the biggest you can find, and don't be afraid of root bound. Don't pot it into too big a pot. keep it root bound. Root bound is much better than